I would say like the number one feeling that I had throughout those 7 months was fear. I had never felt more scared of myself, of my body, of my health. Like I was so terrified. It was just very terrifying when you feel like you've genuinely lost the ability to sleep. But when I learned that there was a group where you could do that, you could talk to these people that have been through it, I thought, this is what I need, because no one in my family understood. And that was so devastating. It was so hard for my partner to not really be able to empathize. It was so difficult for him. So I went online to search for the book, and I ended up finding your channel. And I just plugged my laptop into my TV, and the first episode I watched, I believe, was Abby. For the first time since this struggle, that like I was validated and seen, and it's going to be okay. Because her story was so similar to what I was feeling that I knew, I bought into it. And for good reason. I knew that it wasn't just some paid actor. Like I was like, that is a very specific feeling of helplessness and loneliness that only someone who's experienced it would know. I trust this person, and I'm going to see what her success was. And I felt amazing. And that night, I slept beautifully.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to yet another really special Talking Insomnia episode. We have Cory with us. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here.
So glad to have you. And just a quick backstory, you were part of our Insomnia Immunity Program. I think you were part of BedTyme as well. Mm-hmm. And then you sent me a message on TikTok actually saying like, hey, I'd like to be a guest. And I was like, of course, I'd love to have you as a guest. So here we are.
Yes.
And with that said, tell us in your words, how did it all start? How did you start having trouble sleeping, Cory?
Yes. So I have an exact date. It was September 15th, 2023. So almost coming up on a year. And I had just moved to my first single apartment, like apartment living alone in Manhattan. And it was on essentially like the first floor. And so I was used to being in a high rise where I couldn't hear anything. And the first night I stayed there with my partner, and I had started to hear, like I could hear people just like casually walking outside. I could hear cars drive by. And for like an hour, I was a little bit awake, and my partner had went to sleep, no problem. And then I started to really hone in on these very minor external noises. And I essentially stayed up that entire night. First time in my life, I think ever, that I've hadn't been able to fall asleep at all. And I woke up, and I was just the panic, because I immediately, and this is going to be such a common theme throughout my insomnia struggle, I immediately went to, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to sleep in this apartment. I just signed this lease. I couldn't even sleep the first night. And it was just this waterfall effect. And I was so, so, so upset. And that day started what was about a 7-month struggle with pretty intense insomnia.
I hear. Thanks for sharing that. And so it was a new apartment. And of course, like when there's changes in our lives, we're always a little bit apprehensive. These sounds essentially kept you awake the whole night. And you were immediately very worried about the fact that you hadn't slept. So what do you do next, or what happens next?
Yeah. So I immediately went to, I need to fix this. I need to fix it, and I need to fix it now. And I went immediately to, clearly it's my circumstances and conditions causing the insomnia, because I was able to sleep in my previous apartment and now I can't. So I went through the blackout curtains. I bought a new mattress. I got a sound machine. I got earplugs. I got other earplugs. I moved my bed. I mean, that obsessiveness went on for about a month. So there was like a month of like, okay, let me fix the circumstances. And what had happened is I had then inherently become obsessed with sleep. So it was the sleep efforts is what I started with, or for before the sleep effort, I guess they were sleep efforts, but it was like the changing my circumstances. And that went on for a month, and then that didn't work.
And during that month, how successful were you, quote unquote, in terms of like blocking out sound and light in your sleep, in your bedroom?
I ended up blocking out all the light, 90% of the sounds, and it still wasn't working. So for the first month, it was like, okay, let me just fix the circumstances, and then I went as far as to like, I was about to pay a couple $1,000s to soundproof my windows. And it's important to note that like no one else in the building really struggled with that. So I knew that like, okay, maybe this is more like an internal battle, but I wasn't the first month. It was like, let me fix. And then I ended up being able to eliminate all those circumstances, and I still was left with the insomnia. So that was the first month.
Yeah. And during this month, like you had like the first night was a sleepless night. What was it like for that first month? Was it like kind of on and off? Sometimes you slept, sometimes you didn't sleep, or was it mostly very choppy nights? Or what was that first month in terms of the nights?
It was horrible. It was 3 hours a night. It was like I'd end up falling asleep around 4, waking up at 8, sleeping. It was very, very choppy. And then what had started to happen is, so then I kind of left the circumstances and conditions and moved to like the sleep itself. So I think, let's see, end of October was probably like I was really down. Like I had started to develop depression, and I had always had anxiety. But the interesting thing is I had always used sleep as a way to cope with my anxiety. Like I've always been able to be super anxious and like take a nap or go to sleep. And when I started not being able to do that, it was just complete fear. Like I really felt like I had lost the ability to sleep. And I would say probably around end of October. It's honestly a little blurry because I really felt like I was just not even a human. End of October, I started to seek like professional help.
I see. And we want to hear about that, of course. But first, I just want to highlight that I'm so glad you're bringing this up, because this is actually something I don't think we ever talked about in one of these interviews, but something that comes up very often when we talk to students, which is that before, not only did someone like have no struggle sleeping, but it's almost like sleep was like an escape, like a reset, something like that. And when that's gone, it can be really scary, right?
And you're spot on. And I will say, because I know my mind's going to go everywhere, because I'm really so grateful that I'm able to be here today to talk about this. I would say like the number one feeling that I had throughout those 7 months was fear. I had never felt more scared of myself, of my body, of my health. Like I was so terrified. And there were so many points, and I'll talk more as we go on because it only got worse, but there were so many points where I was like, I have to go to a hospital, and I just have to have medical professionals there to do something. Like I can't live in this it was just very terrifying when you feel like you've genuinely lost the ability to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. And during this first month, let's say, I'm guessing you have some type of obligation during the day, some things you need to do. How did that go?
Yeah, so I'm a software engineer for a corporate company, and I'm 3 days in. And that was so incredibly difficult. And I remember actually in retrospect, like there was a gentleman on your that was a guest on your podcast who was also, I think, an engineer. I forget his name, but I had really resonated to his story because I had to really think in my job, and I had to, make intentional decisions. And so, I mean, I actually took photographs of like what I had looked like through it, but I would show up 1 hour, 2 hours of sleep. But what's interesting is once I started the sleep coach program, like I still in the beginning was still not sleeping well or at all, but I was really able to function. But the fear had just consumed me and it was really difficult to work through it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was it some like looking back, you somehow like you somehow made it through despite not feeling like that was possible or something like that.
Yeah, so it's interesting because had I had the tools I have now that I've learned from the sleep coach school, I think my perspective would have been way different. So I'm very proud of myself for still being able to, I think of like pre finding this school and post, and pre, I had no hope and I had no evidence that it would get better. So I'm proud of myself for still pushing through even when I really thought there was a never ending to it. Yeah, that was, yeah.
All right. Thanks for sharing that one. And now let's go back to sort of the storyline here where like we have the first month where you're looking at the circumstances, the sounds, like moving the bedroom and like the bed, et cetera, realizing that's not getting you anywhere. And now it sounds like the next step was you seeking out like professional help.
Yep. So throughout this whole process, I very much was like, didn't even want to take melatonin. I come from a family I'm a child of addiction. And so I was very mindful about any type of medication and the stigma and whatnot. And, insomnia is not something that's really talked about a lot. In fact, before I had experienced it, I don't even think I ever heard about insomnia in like a medical realm. Like you hear anxiety, depression, but like I've never heard of one of my friends struggling with quote insomnia. But in any case, it had gotten really bad. And so my first step was, okay, let me fix my anxiety. And you'll notice I keep saying the word fix because this is what kind of like made my insomnia worse. I thought, let me fix the insomnia and that will help me sleep. So I started going back to therapy and spoke with a therapist, and I ended up getting put on an SSRI, first time ever. And I had had anxiety my whole life. And was very against medication. But at this point, I was like, let me just try this. So they started me on Zoloft, and I just had a really bad reaction to it. And I was like, the panic was worse. And so I stopped taking that.
And sorry to interrupt, Cory, but what are you told in terms of like the explanation of like why this is happening?
Yes. So I had received like medical advice that, this could be just anxiety. And so if we get your anxiety under control, your sleep will get under control. And I bought into it because I was like, I have nothing else to lose. Right. And so I remember being, and I know this is talked about a lot on your podcast, I was so excited because I was like, okay, great. Now I know this is going to fix it. It's going to be perfect. I'm going to get my anxiety under control. I'm going to go to sleep and I'm going to love this apartment and have, a great life. Take the medication. I actually had like a physical reaction to it. So I discontinued it and I was like, all right, back at square one. And so then the psychiatrist that I was talking to, nurse practitioner, was like, we need to get you to sleep. Like this is, and that was the first time that someone had told me like, you need to sleep from a medical person. And I was just like, so terrified of that because here I have something out of my control, right? And I'm being told that I have to do it. So then she had put me on like a high dose of melatonin, which even that I was hesitant to take. I took it. It worked the first night. I thought I was cured. Took it the second night. Didn't work. So then I stopped and I kind of like stopped seeing that psychiatrist. Here is where I had what I thought was a turning point. I had decided to go to a sleep doctor. So this was actually to the day last year. It was on Halloween, October 31st. I found the #1 sleep doctor in the country. He worked out of Mount Sinai. It was almost impossible to get an appointment. the feeling of just getting the appointment, it was like the best day ever. I was like, I'm going to be cured. I'm going to be fixed. This is amazing because I'm doing everything I need to fix this. Go to the sleep doctor. It's pretty much a questionnaire. They're like, yep, sounds like insomnia. We're going to put you on a sleep restriction plan. So they had went through the sleep efforts in a positive way, though. So they were like, make sure it's as dark as possible, as quiet as possible. Here I am. You're telling,
sorry to interrupt here, but it's like, did they know that you essentially slept in like this sensory deprivation chamber? There was no light, no sound.
Right. And also, even regardless of that, like you're telling someone that lives in Manhattan, like I was able to do it. I was able to make that chamber, but I'm like, we live in New York and you're telling me like it should be as quiet as possible. But in any case, so they're saying this and I'm getting more upset because I'm like, I've already done those things. Like anytime I was given new advice, I was so excited because I was like, this is a new opportunity to fix it. So in any case, he was like, the biggest point is sleep restriction. And as your guests have talked to on the show, and I think the podcast, I think Abby was a guest that I had watched and really resonated with. I think she might have spoke on this, but it was horrible, Daniel. My advice was to have a 7-hour window. Mind you, pre-insomnia, I was sleeping 9 hours. Like I was a sleeper, whatever. He was suggesting it needs to be 7 hours. And if you can't fall asleep within 15 minutes, get up and do something relaxing. Now, let me tell you, you take a person who quite literally has not slept in what feels like 2 months, who's riddled with anxiety, and you're going to tell them, oh, if you can't fall asleep in 15 minutes, just go do something relaxing. It was such a like oxymoron for me, but I did it and I tried. And I would get out of bed and I would go back into bed. And, at pre-insomnia, my relaxing routine is I would scroll on my phone in bed. I'd watch the news. I'd FaceTime people. And that was a no-no. So that was stripped away from me. I don't read. I didn't like to do that. So it was torturous. Like I would stay awake every 15 minutes, come out, do that. And that
And what would you like try to do that was relaxing? Supposedly.
I would like try to read, which wasn't even enjoyable to me. I'm not a reader. I'm an analytical person. I don't really partake in literature. I've never done it. I was like buying books. I would try to do that. I would just lay on my couch, put a podcast on. To sum it up, it was very unnatural to me. Like it was very much, I was aware that I was doing these things to go to bed and I was thinking about it. At that time, he had also prescribed me Doxepin to take in parallel to kind of like just help it, ease my way in. And that worked a little bit, but then the anxiety of me taking it made it worse. So then enter the next phase is he recommends I partake in CBT-I. And by the way, while this is all going on, I'm so OCD where like if I have a good night sleeping alone, then I was not gonna, sleep in the same bed as my partner. If I had slept really well at my partner's bed, I was gonna stay there and etc. So then I do CBT-I and I meet with a therapist who specializes in that. And it was the same kind of thing where I pretty much had to log how many hours I slept every night. And that went on for like 3 months. So I think that brings me to January. And through that, I had like 1 week, I remember Thanksgiving, I slept great. And I was like, this is amazing. And I remember telling my therapist, like, oh my gosh, I had the best night of sleep. And she was concerned because she was like, we need to be neutral. We need to be really neutral about this. And so, again, the pattern is it ended up not working. So now it's January and I am depressed. I had never experienced depression in my life. I had never been able to really empathize with what depression looked like or how it felt. And I was absolutely in a depression. Um, and so I went back on anxiety medication. They prescribed me Lexapro. And this wasn't even for the intention to sleep. This was just managing my anxiety. And I'm still on Lexapro today. And for me, it's really, really helped me a lot. So I'm still on it, and I'm happy and proud to say that I take it. But so that was going on. And I think it was middle of January. Middle of January was like the worst it got. And it got to a point where I wasn't even sleeping in my apartment. So I would stay at a friend's and sleep there. I would sleep at my partner's. I had even thought about buying a hotel. Like I was so scared through that. So that was January.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, it's kind of all blurring together, to be
Yeah.
honest. But I remember that was like the bottom of it. And I just remember thinking like, this is my reality. And it had gotten to a point where like, I never had any intention of hurting myself or not being here or anything to that nature. But it was the first time in my life that I genuinely was able to understand why people feel like they should or needed to take their life. Again, I want to make it clear, like I didn't have that feeling to do that, but I was able to understand like, wow, someone can be so uncomfortable with themselves and their reality that that's the alternative. And when it got to that point, I had really lost it. And my family became aware, and it was really terrifying. And so now, fast forward, is it okay if I go into like the recovery part now?
Yeah. I think you told your story in a very helpful way, and it's clear like now it's January and things are really, really difficult. You sort of hit a low point, and then naturally we will wonder like what happens next.
Yes. Okay. So now it's mid-January. I end up moving apartments. There was some other situations that happened in my building. There was like a break-in, my neighbor and whatnot, and I was able to get out of the lease. And so I ended up moving back to my a previous apartment that I was in. And again, my sleep didn't change, but I did feel a little bit more comfortable. Was happy to be back, but I didn't do it for the reason to, fix my sleep. And I think it was February where I had a really good friend that I trusted and respect. And we had started talking about our insomnia. Because one thing I want to note before is when I was in the thick of it and I became so obsessed, like I was so obsessed with how other people were sleeping. I was asking every single person, how did you sleep last night? How many hours do you sleep? Like really, I knew I had an issue because it was all I could ever think about and talk about. In any case, recovery. So my friend had said, I really struggle with insomnia and I've been reading this book, Set It and Forget It. Enter You. And as I said before, I'm not a reader. I don't really like to read. So I was like, all right, I'm also exhausted. I'm sleep deprived. I don't really know if I want to like read through this book, but I'll try it. And she was like, no, like just see, like there's, this influencer, she was on like The Bachelor or something. She was like, she talks about her insomnia and she's read the book. And so, just try it. So I went online to search for the book and I ended up finding your channel. And I'll never forget, because I think it was at the beginning of February, I'm sitting in my apartment and I just plugged my laptop into my TV. And the first episode I watched, I believe, was Abby. And I had felt for the first time since this struggle that like I was validated and seen and it's going to be okay. Because her story was so similar to what I was feeling that I knew I bought into it. and for good reason. I knew that it wasn't just some paid actor. Like, I was like, that is a very specific feeling of helplessness and loneliness that only someone who's experienced it would know. I trust this person, and I'm going to see what her success was. And I felt amazing. And that night, I slept beautifully. So I was like, this is interesting. This is something that I can kind of get behind. And for that week, I just started watching more videos. I watched, I don't remember, maybe Aaliyah. Alina. Yeah, I watched Alina. I watched, maybe her name was Nadia, so someone who had struggled with insomnia for years. And I remember you saying like she used to show up on the classes with like a hood and like,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
yeah.
Ida.
Yes. So then I watched Ida, and I was like, whoa. She would, and her story of how she would always ask the baristas, how many hours did you sleep? And she was obsessed with it. I was like, this is me and I am her. And let me skip to the end and see how she got through it. So once I watched those two, I was like, this is my last shot. This is what I'm going to pursue. So then I download BedTyme. I think it was BedTyme. Yeah, it was like each day I did the free trial. And that even, I slept great that night and the next night. And I was like, what is in this sauce? Like, it's so different than what I've been told. And I feel so comfortable. And it was this switch of it, that it's not circumstantial. It's not conditions. It's really nothing in your control. Well, then I was able to start to relinquish control, and I felt better because I'm like, oh, it's really not my fault. It's almost like watching a professional baseball game. I say this because I just watched the Yankees lose last night, but it's like the feeling of watching it, knowing, you're obviously hoping for something, but it's out of your control. So you don't feel that anxiety, that pressure. That's how I felt. And it was really, really helping me. And I was getting excited to go to sleep. This is the interesting thing. I was feeling excited because I knew that it really didn't matter if I slept well or not, that was not what was going to get me to the end. And then I had decided, I think it was March, maybe, to join the program.
And at that point, was it like you already seen things getting easier for you? You're kind of adjusting all this education. And by the way, your baseball analogy, like, very nice analogy. I made a mental note to use that one. But is it? In fact, I remember actually you sent me a message, I think, on TikTok, I think, and you were sort of like, I would like to have something that's more hands-on. And I remember I saw that I sent a message back to you saying like, yeah, the Insomnia Immunity Program, we have this group calls where you actually talk to people live, so it is a bit more hands-on. And was it sort of that you were looking for that made you join the immunity program, or what made you take that step?
So what it was is I wanted nothing more than to be able to call up Abby and say, tell me everything. How did you do this? You get me. Be there for me. Essentially, obviously, I wasn't going to, track this person down. But when I learned that there was a group where you could do that, you could talk to these people that have been through it, I thought, this is what I need, because no one in my family understood. And that was so devastating. It was so hard for my partner to not really be able to empathize. It was so difficult for him. And my boss didn't get it. And it's interesting because, kind of going back here, but my leader at the time talked about, she would say things like, well, I only sleep like 6 hours, or like I have a kid, so I wake up every hour. And it was like, yes, but I don't even have an excuse. Like, my body won't even let me sleep. And that kind of made it worse. So in any case, I joined the Insomnia program. And the lessons were really good, but I think just having the community was incredible. And so helpful. And, Christian really left an impact on me. Alina, yourself, of course. And I just started continuing with the program. I was not scared of sleeping anymore. I was not afraid of not sleeping. I think the biggest piece that helped me was building the confidence and evidence of the next day. So like, if I don't sleep well, can I still do a good day's worth of work? And there was one day where I had slept truly an hour and 30 minutes, and I had a kick-ass day at work. And I was like, boom, there's my evidence. You're an analytical thinker, Cory. Here you go. And I just held on to it. And holding on to that evidence of like, the day will go on, you will be okay, slowly started to peel back on that control. And I kept through the program.
That's amazing. And you pointed to something here which is very common, that it's not necessarily like not sleeping in itself that is the most scary or what drives a lot of people's struggle, but it's the fear of what the next day will be like. Was that a big fear that had been driven your, like, producing a lot of pressure for you to sleep and driven your struggle?
Of course. And it definitely was. And but I think about now, and this is such a common topic that's discussed, throughout the program, is there were times where I slept way less in college and I was fine and things like that. So yeah, it was definitely just the fear of like, what's going to happen to me. And, you read online, sleep deprivation can kill you and this and that. And I was very lucky at the time to have a close friend who is a doctor, who they're an anesthesiologist, and she struggles with insomnia. And she was able to be like, that's not true. There's no truth to that. Like, so it was good to have that. But yeah, it was the fear of like, what's going to happen the next day. And another point, to go back, I'm kind of jumping around here, but this I think is really important. Throughout this whole struggle, I tried so hard to pull together pieces of my past. I started thinking and remembering like every time I've slept in uncomfortable situations. Like I would be like, oh, but I remember that, freshman year of college, I slept in a room with 4 other people and I was able to sleep. And oh, I remember the house I grew up in, I had a lot of light in my room and I was able to sleep. Like it was just really obsessive of how I would go back to try to figure out this formula. Throughout the program, once I started to sleep well and not sleep well, and have a day where I was super anxious and sleep well, and have a day where I was not anxious and not sleep well, was actually great, because I really was able to prove to myself, albeit maybe it took a while, that there's no rhyme or reason at all.
Yeah.
Truly.
And yeah, so helpful. And for those of you who are like, just to be super clear for everyone that's tuning in here, what Cory is describing is that there's no relationship between like how many hours of sleep you got and how you felt the next day, in terms of not only maybe productivity, but also how anxious you were, et cetera, et cetera. And why that can be so liberating, of course, is then you see like, so why do I need to try so hard to try to sleep many hours when it actually isn't what drives how I feel the next day? And that's so liberating and makes things so much easier, right?
Yep. So liberating. And then also the notion of like, well, there's really no specific reason why you sleep or don't sleep, except for, the gas pedal, the
gas and brake,
yeah.
the gas.
So
Yeah.
And then I kept going with the program. And even I had graduated probably before I even started having great sleep. I felt good enough. Like I had all the tools I needed, and I had the references of like, it's just your fear of not sleeping that prevents you from sleeping and whatnot. And I kept at it and I kept at it. And what I noticed is I started to stop remembering when my last bad night of sleep was.
Yeah.
So in the beginning of this struggle, everything was tracked. The exact day I couldn't sleep, what I did that day, how many hours it was, what day of the week I didn't sleep. All of that I started to forget. I started to not remember when the last good night or bad night of sleep I had. And it started to become this feeling of how I used to think about sleep, which was I didn't. And that was really powerful for me. And then from that, I started, and I want to be clear, like the the goal of the program is to not be able to like sleep. It's to relinquish that fear of not sleeping. But I do think some people ask, and it's important to know that, yes, ultimately my sleep has been amazing ever since. So I'm grateful for that. But I want to make it clear that that's not when I left the program. Like, I was healed from my insomnia before I saw the results.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I was just gonna ask about exactly that. I was just gonna say, like, not this doesn't really matter, but I was gonna ask how you're sleeping now. But you already answered that one. So I have I have a few more questions. One of them is actually your friend who gave you Set It and Forget It, or recommended Set It and Forget It. How's she doing?
So she's doing well. So I did leave out another piece of information, is that in January, like when I started the Lexapro, I also was prescribed Trazodone, very low dose. I know it's a very common, like non-technically non-habit forming medication. Yeah. And I still actually take it today. I take like half of the lowest dose. And another reason why I felt like I was ready to graduate is I stopped thinking about that I even take it, or caring that I take it, and knowing that that's not what's making me sleep, because there's nights that I still don't sleep well and I take it, and I know that that medication is not producing the sleep. And I actually find it really refreshing that I'm okay with taking it, because it's just, I think of it as like I sleep on a pillow. I'm taking this medication. Like, it's so not even
Relevant, yeah.
relevant, which I think is important, because I know there's a lot of people that might be watching that are torn between medication and, so that's something. Yeah.
Did you have that? Yeah, it's super nice that you're bringing this up, because you're pointing out what I think is so true, that, I always say that millions of people sleep well without taking Trazodone, for example. Millions of people sleep well taking Trazodone. It's not what matters. It's like when we feel conflicted about something and think, should I take this, should I not take that? That's the tricky thing. Did you go through that conflict phase?
Yes. And I remember actually you had dropped in on like a bi-weekly, and I remember telling you like my concern. Like, I was like, oh, I left the medication at my partner's, and
Oh, I
should
remember
I
that.
go?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just the conflict. And that's why I love that the advice you had given was, just decide to take it or decide not to. But the waffling back and forth, I had tried to do. I was like, all right, well, now I'm sleeping well. Let me not try to not take it. And that just messed up my mind. And I can tell you 100% it was not because of the lack of taking it. It was okay, now I'm not going to take it. And now I have to sleep without it. Otherwise, I'm going to be convinced that I need it. Because there was a time where I forgot to take it and I slept fine.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was the waffling. Yeah, I definitely felt that inner conflict.
Wow. All right. Now I want to ask you, if you could, travel back in time to, let's say, a year before now, and tell yourself something, what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself, what you're about to experience is going to be the hardest, most challenging thing you've faced, but you coming out of it is going to be the most important lesson you've learned in your life thus far. And I wholeheartedly stand by that. I would not wish what I was going through on my worst enemy, but I am so grateful that I did, because I can tell you, I feel like I can take on anything. I feel so prepared, and I've seen it. I've experienced challenging life events since. I've experienced my friends with challenging. I feel resilient, truly resilient. And to anyone out there that's watching, I feel you and I understand you, and what you're going through is so beyond what most people can even begin to understand. It is such an internal battle. It's terrifying. It can feel debilitating at times, and I get it. And this is not to take away from those feelings, but I promise you, it's not unique. We've felt it, we've been through it, and you will get to the other side.
Yeah. Wow, it's amazing. Yes, thanks for sharing that, Cory. And I was, as you probably know, I was going to ask, like, has this, what you learned from the struggle, has it helped in other areas of life? And clearly the answer was yes.
It has, just learning how to, give it up to your higher power, your God, your whatever it is that you have faith in or believe in, just giving it up and relinquishing that control. I've seen it in so many other aspects of my life, and it's a great lesson to learn. It's unfortunate how those lessons come about, but I'm grateful for that experience. I never, ever in a million years would have ever thought that I would say that I'm grateful for what I went through, because when I was in it, I was like, I just remember bargaining. Like I was in the phase of like loss with what I thought was my ability to sleep and my life and my livelihood. And I remember just being like, I'll do anything, like be like on my knees praying, like I'll stop drinking alcohol socially. I'll be better with this. I'll call my parents more. Like I'll do anything. I'll eat healthy. Whatever it is. Like I just wanted to trade it for anything in the world. And to be able to be on the side that I am now, and also not be afraid to talk about it. My shining light, or like my North Star, as you mentioned, was to always be able to come on this podcast. But I remember watching some of the success stories while I was in my recovery and seeing, positivity. I was like, well, I'm not going to do that, because I just know once I do that, my insomnia is going to come back. And I don't feel that way anymore.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, we'll conclude here. This is a very, very powerful story, Cory, and I have no doubt it will help so many people out there. So, just thanks so much for being here, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye everyone.
Hi, it's me, Coach Daniel. I hope you found the video you just saw eye-opening and really, really helpful on your path towards peaceful sleep and peace of mind. We at the Sleep Coach School, we try to really do our best to put out a ton of helpful educational content. And if it leads you where you want to be, that is wonderful. In that case, please tell the world about our channel. Hit the like button, subscribe, get other people involved and get them to find our teachings, because that can be so helpful to them. Now, on the other hand, there are some things that are not necessarily available in our free content, and that is community. Leaving the struggle can be quite a lonely journey. You can feel quite isolated. And when you join a community of people who are on their path of leaving insomnia, or who have already done so, then your path can be so much easier and lighter. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, then head over to our website, thesleepcoachschool.com, and you can learn about our Insomnia Immunity Program there. And if you decide to join, then we can't wait to see you on the other side.